Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is actually our first lecture in this series, From Medium to Meaning, Critical Perspectives in Art History. So each month, we're going to be focusing on a specific medium and kind of in loose connection to one of the views on show around campus. So with Jackie Malad's show up in Silber, we're connecting how stone connects to ancient Egyptian art, although at the end, we're going to end with the Book of the Dead. So sometimes it was etched in stones, but most of the time it was on papyrus and other materials. All right, are we ready? Excellent. Now, when you walk into a museum and you see an ancient Egyptian sculpture, it's smooth, unmoving surface, it's perfect symmetry. It feels like time has stopped. But that stillness is an illusion. For the Egyptians, this art wasn't made to be looked at. It was made to live. Every statue, every painted wall, every coffin was part of a larger system of resurrection. Art was not decoration. It was technology. It kept the soul alive. So today we're going to think about Egyptian art not as something frozen in the past, but as something that worked. It worked to sustain belief, to preserve power, and of course, to promise eternity. Unlike the linear time that dominates modern thought, birth, life, and death, the ancient Egyptians imagined time as cyclical. The sun god Ra was reborn every dawn, and so too could the human soul. The self was made of multiple parts. The Ba, the personality or mobility of the soul, the Ka, the life force, and the Ach, the transfigured eternal being. Death wasn't an end. It was a complicated transformation. But that transformation needed help. It needed the right materials, images, and rituals. That's why our series is From Medium to Meaning, because in ancient Egypt, the medium was the meaning. Stone, pigment, gold, and form were not symbols of eternity. They were eternity made visible. Funerary art serves a practical and spiritual purpose. A tomb wall showing the deceased eating bread wasn't nostalgic, it was magical. The image made it so. The act of painting, carving, or inscribing turned belief into reality. This logic, where images do real work, is one of the most important legacies of Egyptian art. And it's something we still see today in the way we treat images as powerful. From memorial murals to viral photos that become political icons. During this lecture, I would like to ask you to think about what images today do we treat as sacred, enduring, or immortal. Throughout Egyptian funerary art, there are three ideals that are repeated over and over again. Permanence, the desire to last forever. The divine order, also called Mat, M-A''A'-T, the ideal that harmony, balance, and justice hold the world together. And of course, the journey, the passage through death into rebirth. Every object we'll look at today, whether a tomb, a painting, or a mask, translates these cosmic principles into tangible forms. They make the invisible visible. So as we move into the first part of today's lecture, think of the tomb not as just a grave, but as a portal, a piece of architecture designed to bridge time, body, and eternity. The Egyptians didn't just imagine eternity, they literally built it. For the ancient Egyptians, the tomb was not just a place to bury the body. It was a complete universe in miniature. Every line, every chamber, every direction corresponded to the cosmic order. Architecture itself became a language of belief. The story of Egyptian tomb architecture begins not with the pyramids, but with something much humbler. The mastaba. The mastaba was a flat, rectangular structure built of mud brick or limestone, sloping slightly like a bench. In Arabic, mastaba literally means stone bench. It functioned as the first house for eternity. Beneath the mastaba lay a deep burial shaft where the body and grave goods were placed. Above ground, a small chapel allowed family members to leave offerings, to speak prayers, and to keep the deceased present in memory. The mastaba's low, solid shape symbolized stability and permanence and conveyed the ideals of mat. The tomb wasn't a memorial, but a dwelling for the ka, the vital spirit. Decoration inside showed the deceased performing daily tasks, ensuring eternity continued forever. Here we see the essential Egyptian logic, architecture as a system of protection, ritual, and rebirth. Under Pharaoh Goucher, during the Third Dynasty, which is around 2630 BCE, everything changed. His architect, Imhotep, if you've seen The Mummy, that's the main bad guy in the Mummy movie. Imhotep was the first architect in history whose name we know, transformed the humble mastaba into something extraordinary. Instead of a single mastaba, Imhotep stacked several of decreasing size, one on top of another, creating the step pyramid at Saqqara, the first large-scale structure in stone. This marked the birth of monumental architecture and the pharaoh's transformation from human ruler to divine being. The pyramid form echoed the primeval mound that first emerged from the waters of chaos at creation, linking the king's tombs with cosmic beginnings. The rising tiers suggest ascension to the heavens, a staircase to eternity. What has once been a private home for the dead became a cosmic monument. Death itself was monumentalized. Now, in the Old Kingdom, the Fourth Dynasty, which starts around 2613 BCE, the step pyramid evolved into the smooth-sided pyramid, a shape that symbolized the rays of the sun. The pharaoh, now explicitly identified with the sun god Ra, would ascend those shining limestone slopes to join the solar cycle, dying in the west and reborn in the east each day. Now, the pyramids didn't emerge fully formed. They were the result of a remarkable architectural experimentation. The bent pyramid at Dashur shows the builder's learning process. Its lower angle was much too steep, forcing a mid-construction change that gives it its unique bent silhouette. It marks a transition, the moment when engineering met theology. The red pyramid, built soon after by the same king, Sneferu, perfects the geometry with smooth, even slopes. It's the first successful true pyramid, the model for all that followed. Finally, the Great Pyramid at Khufu at Giza represents the accumulation of that evolution, precisely aligned to the cardinal points, encased in gleaming limestone, and the very top of the biggest one actually had gold, so it would sparkle in the sun. That left really quickly, as you can imagine. And engineered with astonishing accuracy. Inside, the corridors, burial chamber, and air shafts formed a vertical axis, this red line, that connected earth and sky, a literal pathway for the pharaoh's soul to ascend and join the sun god Ra. In these refinements, architecture becomes a cosmology in stone, a bridge between the mortal and the divine. The pyramid was not just a tomb, it was a machine for resurrection. Its perfect geometry expressed the cosmic order that guaranteed eternal life. By the New Kingdom, pharaohs abandoned the visible pyramid for a new kind of architecture, the rock-cut tomb. These were carved deep into the cliffs of the west bank of the Nile, the land of the setting sun and the realm of the dead. The shift reflected both practicality and theology. After centuries of tomb robbery, secrecy became protection. The hidden corridors, decorated with painted reliefs and texts from the Book of the Dead, guided the king through the underworld. The tomb itself became a symbolic journey, moving from the light of the entrance into the dark womb of the mountain, where rebirth awaited. Even without the pyramid form, the logic remained the same: architecture as cosmology, the body of the tomb mirroring the body of the universe. Think of how this evolution mirrors changing ideals of eternity itself, from public monument to private interior journey. The Egyptians built what they believed, that death wasn't an ending, but a passage to light. Notice that each design is both practical and symbolic. Walls protect the body, but they also map the cosmos. The tomb was simultaneously a home, a temple, and a vehicle of transformation. Egyptians described the tomb, again, as the house of eternity. The body rested within, but the Ka, reminder, the vital spirit, needed a familiar environment to return to. That's why tombs are filled with scenes of food, servants, music, gardens, and family. They were not memories. They were literally instructions for eternity. The tomb of Ti at Saqqara offers a remarkable glimpse into how architecture and image work together to secure eternity for Egypt's elite. Now, Ti himself wasn't a pharaoh. He was a high-ranking official, a royal overseer, yet his tomb rivals royal monuments in sophistication and scale. That alone tells us how deeply the ideals of immortality had spread beyond kingship. The tomb's chapel is designed like a home for the Ka, the vital spirit, complete with a false door through which the soul could move between worlds, and an offering table where family members brought food and drink to nourish it. Its carved reliefs show scenes of farming, herding, and carpentry, not, again, as nostalgia, but as magical performances, ensuring these activities would continue forever in the afterlife. Every detail, from layout to decoration, turns daily life into cosmic permanence, the domestic made divine. Scenes like this just don't show daily life. They assert continuity. Ti's idealized image, eternally youthful and calm, proclaims, as it was in life, so it will be forever. The tomb allows him to keep working, managing, and existing, frozen in the perfect order of Mat. So ponder about, why might someone want their afterlife to look like daily life rather than paradise? What does that say about Egyptian values? Tomb design also made social and political statements. The larger and more complex the tomb, the greater the display of statues and divine favor. Royal tombs express divine right, the pharaoh as intermediary between gods and humans. Elite tombs like Ti's echoed royal motifs to align themselves symbolically with power. Even workers' tombs at Del El Medina, built for the artisans who built the royal tombs, used miniature versions of elite structures, showing how access to eternity was both spiritual and social. Thus, eternity was stratified. Not everyone could afford immortality in stone, but many aspired to it. We can read tomb architecture as an early form of legacy branding, just like today's memorials or even social media archives. These monuments project who deserves to be remembered and how. Think about how architectural scale still communicates power. From state memorials to luxury mausoleums, who gets to have a house of eternity? Now, the layout of the tomb, the location of itself, also mirrored cosmic geography. East and west, light and darkness, life and death, all had spatial, three-dimensional meanings. The west was in the land of the dead, where the sun sets, so almost all the Egyptian tombs are west of the Nile. The east was the land of the living, with its sunshine and renewal. So the tomb's orientation connected the deceased journey with the daily rebirth of the sun. This east-west duality symbolized eternal return. Every dawn promised resurrection, both cosmic and personal. So when we say tombs as portals, we mean that quite literally. These spaces were bridges between life and death, order and chaos, heaven and earth. Inside these portals, the walls themselves begin to speak. They show us how Egyptians used color, proportion, and image to make eternity visible. My favorite is this image of the cat. Now let's step inside one of these tombs now and look more closely at what the walls reveal. When we think of art today, we often think of expression, something an artist makes to show how they feel or how they see the world. Egyptian art was not about expression. It was about activation. Every line, color, and symbol helped make eternity function. Images were ritual tools, not decorations. Depicting an act, again, like eating or receiving offerings, meant ensuring it could happen forever in the afterlife. The tomb's walls were an interface between the living and the dead, a place where offerings and remembrance could reach the Ka. Remember that vital life force. So, to an Egyptian viewer, this was not an image of food. It was food. Egyptian artists worked within a strict visual system, a grid that ensured the proportions of the human body aligned with divine order. Art followed rules because the universe followed rules. Stability, predictability, and balance were all expressions of Mat, the cosmic principle of harmony. They used a grid based on the height of the figure, divided into units called 18 fists, because it's 18 fists tall. Shoulders shown frontally, eyes, front, legs, in profile. A composite view that gave the fullest possible representation of the human form. This wasn't about realism. It was about completeness. To us, the figures might look stiff. To the Egyptians, they were perfect. Every part visible, nothing hidden, nothing incomplete. With that in mind, if you had to decide an image that would last forever, what would you choose? Realism or idealization? Additionally, color in Egyptian art wasn't aesthetic, it was theological. Red symbolized vitality, life force, and the desert's power. Green, made from malachite, showed regeneration, rebirth, and the color of Osiris, the god of fertility, agriculture, the afterlife, the dead, resurrection, life, and vegetation. Blue represented the heavens, the Nile, and divine creation. Gold transformed into the literal flesh of the gods, eternal and incorruptible. Notice how these colors rarely fade, even after 3,000 years, partly because of mineral pigments, partly because of what they symbolize, the refusal to decay. Color as life force survives in so many cultures, from religious iconography to flags to digital color palettes today that signal emotion or power. Hieroglyphs blur the line between language and image. Each sign is both a word and a picture, a dual code of sight and sound. When carved into tomb walls, text didn't just become reality, it brought it into being. Writing someone's name ensured their presence, erasing it destroyed them. It was a visual act of creation. So that's why the Egyptians feared damnatio memoriae, the erasure of one's name from monuments, more than physical death. Without the written name, the person ceased to exist. So what might our equivalents be today? Think about how identity can vanish online if a digital record is deleted or suppressed. What does this mean for how we build memory now? Now, many tombs show lively scenes: fishing, feasting, music, dance, gardening, concubines. At first glance, they look like genre scenes of leisure, but their purpose, again, was metaphysical. Here, we're looking at Nebamun's hunting in the marshes. Now, Nebamun was a middle-ranking official, a scribe and grain accountant, during the period of the New Kingdom in ancient Egypt. This scene depicts an abundance that ensured that abundance would exist forever. The marsh symbolizes rebirth. It's lush, full of life, and for the Egyptians, it is where creation began. Nebamun's pose shows him throwing a stick at birds, accompanied by his wife and daughter. It's not casual. It's a performance of eternal vitality. These images tell us that immortality for the Egyptians wasn't a static condition. It was an active, ongoing life, one that had to be maintained through art. Here we see Nebamun seated at the banquet, flanked by attendants and food offerings. The deceased is always shown as their most ideal: young, healthy, serene, dressed in fine linens. Old age, sickness, imperfection, all erased. Immortality meant becoming the perfected version of oneself. Think of how we still construct idealized versions of ourselves through portraits, photography, even social media. Egyptian tomb art anticipates our modern obsession with the curated self, only their version was meant to last forever. Now that we've stepped inside the tomb and seen how wall reliefs and paintings made eternity visible, we can turn our attention to another medium of immortality: sculpture. If the walls captured the world around the soul, the statues captured the soul itself. In the stone, the Ka could live forever. To the Egyptians, sculpture was not an art in our modern sense of self-expression. It was presence. A statue was an alternative body that allowed the spirit to inhabit the world again. This statue isn't a portrait of someone writing, it's a portrait of writing itself. The eternal act of record keeping, the bureaucratic backbone of Egyptian society. His gaze alert, hands poised over the papyrus scroll, and soft body tell us he's alive, ready to work forever. Sculptures were often placed in tomb chapels, again, where offerings were made. The Ka could enter the statue and receive the food or interact with the living world. Lifelikeness was a kind of magic. The more complete and tangible the figure, the more effectively it could host the spirit. Egyptian realism is always purposeful, though. It's not about individuality, but about functionality, how the image could best serve eternity. On the other hand, if we're talking about kings, the Egyptians were deeply intentional about materials. Stone was not neutral. It was chosen for what it could do. Khafre's statue, carved from diorite, gleams darkly under light, unyielding and eternal. Behind his head, the falcon god Horus wraps protective wings, merging man and divinity into one form. The stone's endurance is the king's power. Think of how modern monuments use material to signal permanence. Marble, bronze, steel, even digital memorials rely on the illusion of durability, the promise that data will last forever. The medium always carries the message. It wasn't just the color that conveyed meaning, but the medium that also determined its function. Limestone was common, workable, and for everyday eternity. Granite or diorite was hard, dark, nearly indestructible, and was used for kings, showing eternal strength. Alabaster was translucent like flesh and associated with light and rebirth. And gold was the flesh of the gods themselves, eternal and incorruptible. Now, not all Egyptians were represented the same way. The closer one's role to divine power, the less natural one appeared. The pharaoh's face doesn't age or show emotion. It radiates cosmic perfection. The scribe's softness, by contrast, signals humanity and labor. Royal sculpture was a political theology, divine power expressed as unchanging perfection. Elite and non-royal portraits used realism to show service and devotion, not individuality. Where might we read realism as honesty, the Egyptians read it as function. The servant must appear human so the spirit can recognize its body. The God King must appear flawless so eternity can recognize its ruler. Now imagine going deeper into the tomb. Imagine discovering hundreds of small figurines buried with a mummy, each holding a tiny hoe or basket. These are shabtis, magical servants for the afterlife. Shabtis were answerers. They were meant to perform manual labor for the deceased in the next world. They were often inscribed with spell 6 from the Book of the Dead, commanding them to respond when called. So that's what that text is. Eternity, as it turns out, needed a workforce. There was no such thing as 9 to 5 after death. In the afterlife, as in life, statues determined your freedom from work. The ideal that power extends beyond death, that privilege is eternal, feels unsettlingly familiar. Our own memorial practices often replicates hierarchies of wealth, beauty, and fame. Now, statues, again, anchored the soul to the earth. Masks and coffins, however, helped it cross into divinity. The body itself was sacred architecture. Mummified, wrapped, enclosed in layers of coffin, sarcophagi, and shrine. Coffins were inscribed with protective deities, spells, and symbols. Masks bridged the human and the divine when the dead person's face merged with the features of Osiris. King Tut's mask, hammered gold inlaid with lapis and quartz, shows not a human boy, but a god reborn. The materials themselves, uncorruptible gold, celestial blue, narrate the transition from mortality to eternity. Think about how we still use portraiture in death. Funeral photos, digital avatars, or even AI memorials. We continue to rely on the image to hold identity when the body can't. So far, we've seen how Egyptians built eternity from stone, pigment, and image, a visual and material network that kept the soul literally alive. But eternity also required guidance, a map for the journey alive, to keep the soul alive. But eternity, in our next section, we'll turn to a pretty extraordinary creation, the Book of the Dead, where text and image come together to visualize the passage through the afterlife. If tomb walls were the architecture for eternity, the Book of the Dead was the traveler's guidebook or the Google Maps, so to say. It featured a collection of spells, prayers, and illustrated scenes written on papyrus, linen shrouds, or even coffin boards. They were produced from the New Kingdom onward, which is around 1550 BCE. It's not a single book, but a customizable compilation each person could purchase or commission their own version. Imagine commissioning your own Afterlife scroll. Part prayer book, part comic strip, part passport. Its goal, help your soul survive the trials after death and reach the blessed fields of reeds. In a sense, it's like a user manual for immortality, a reminder that belief systems are mediated through technology, whether ink on papyrus or pixels on a screen. The Egyptians didn't separate reading from seeing. To write a word or draw an image was to do it. When a spell shows the deceased receiving air or water, those actions are magically enacted. Hieroglyphs were thought to be alive. Even dangerous signs like serpents were sometimes mutilated in writing so they wouldn't come to life. Images were performative. Each reading reactivated the magic. Think about how we still trust symbols to act for us. Digital signatures authorize. A flag mobilizes. An emoji changes tone. Image power endures. One of the most famous scenes shows the deceased led by Anubis into the Hall of Two Truths. The heart is weighed against the feather of Mat, goddess of balance and justice. So if the scales stay even, the soul passes on. If not, the monster Ammit, part crocodile, lion, and hippo, eats your soul, and the soul ceases to exist. You're done. Now, thought records the result, and Horus introduces the justified soul to Osiris, enthroned in the underworld. Now, rows of gods witness the trial. It's a moral image. Eternal life depends not on wealth or birth, but on a balanced heart. Ethics and art are inseparable. The scene teaches as it enchants. How might this image function like a public service announcement, teaching moral behavior through visual storytelling? Beyond judgment, the papyri unfold into literal travelogues. The deceased sails across celestial waters, greets gatekeepers, names secret deities, tills fertile fields, and joins the solar baroque of Ra. Each spell functions like a password, unlocking the next realm. It shows that the afterlife, again, is not static. It's a journey of becoming. Each successful passage reestablishes cosmic order. Think of it as the ultimate role-playing game. Each spell a level, each vignette a checkpoint. Success depends on moral balance and ritual knowledge. In earlier periods, only kings possessed detailed guides to the afterlife. By the New Kingdom, access expanded. They thought, well, that's not very fair. Wealthy officials, artisans, and even some laborers could buy mass-produced scrolls with blanks for their names. Eternity became, in a sense, print on demand. Spiritual access broadened alongside shifts in economic and social structures. The ideal of eternal life moved from royal privilege towards personal salvation. We see similar dynamics whenever technology expands access to sacred or cultural power. Think of printing the Bible or today's online memorial pages that let anyone curate their own legacy. Now, the Book of the Dead reminds us that images guide belief. The Egyptians used art to visualize moral truth, to narrate the unseen, and to give shape to hope. Whether carved in stone or drawn on scrolls, these pictures map what it means to be human in the face of death. From graphic novels to digital memorials, we still turn to illustrated storytelling to confront mortality, to make sense of endings and imagine continuities. As Egyptian ideals about eternity spread beyond their time, their art began new afterlives through collectors, museums, and modern imaginations. In our next and final section, we'll look at those afterlives of afterlife art, from the 19th century Egyptomania to contemporary artists who reclaim and reinterpret this visual legacy. Ironically, the art created to last forever has been anything but still. Over the last 2 centuries, Egyptian tombs and temples have been excavated, looted, displayed, copied, and reinterpreted across the globe. In 1798, Napoleon's campaign sparked European Egyptomania. From the 1820s to the 1880s, we see large-scale excavations and Egyptian artifacts flood Western museums. In fact, Goucher received most of their Egyptian collection during the late 1800s, during this phase. And then in 1922, the discovery of King Tut's tomb ignites global and frantic fascination. Now, the promise of eternity became a commodity, something you could buy, own, or display. Objects once meant to protect the soul now circulate as trophies of empire. If Egyptian tombs were made to house the dead, what happens when those objects are taken away? Can a statue still function as a vessel for the Ka when it's in a glass case in London or New York? Museums became modern tombs of a different kind, quiet, climate-controlled, and filled with relics. But they also became sites of power. Who tells the story of Egypt, and from what perspective? Many Egyptian objects were removed under colonial or exploitative conditions. Debates over repatriation and ownership continue today. Western display often emphasizes beauty and mystery, detaching artifacts from their religious and cultural functions. What was once sacred becomes aesthetic. What was alive became silent. Today, curators and artists are rethinking what it means to hold history, moving from possession towards dialogue, from display towards repair. Egyptian imagery became shorthand for glamour, mystery, and power. The 1920s Tut mania turned hieroglyphs into fashion prints, pyramids into hotel motifs, and mummies into movie monsters. Colonial fascination often exoticized Egypt and was more fantasy than history. Egypt became a symbol of timelessness and a stage for Western imagination. Eternity, once spiritual, was rebranded as style. Today, artists across African diaspora and the Middle East are reclaiming Egypt's imagery, not as exotic relics, but as living symbols of Blackness, identity, and power. Awu Eruzuku's Nefertiti selfie reclaims a global icon of beauty for Black femininity and self-representation. Beyoncé's visual performance turns Egyptian queenship into a language of empowerment, placing a Black body at the center of the world's art history. Wao Shawaki uses Egyptian history and puppetry to critique colonial narratives and religious mythologies. And lastly, of course, our very own Jackie Millard here up in the gallery does the same. These works remind us that eternity isn't only about preservation. It's also about reinvention. To make something eternal is to keep it alive through reinterpretation. What happens when ancient symbols are reactivated by contemporary artists? Does that extend eternity or rewrite it? Across everything we've seen today, from mastabas to pyramids, painted walls to golden masks, the Egyptians used art to transform death into continuity. Their architecture, sculpture, and painting weren't created about the afterlife. They performed it. They turned matter into belief. Every stone, pigment, and line obeyed the principles of Mat: harmony, balance, and order. By building in accordance with the cosmos, Egyptians believed they could make eternity tangible. This is what our series title, From Medium to Meaning, is really about. In Egyptian art, the material, stone, gold, pigment, papyrus, is the message. The endurance of granite, the glow of gold, the rhythm of hieroglyphs all manifest a single ideal, that to create is to preserve. I want you to think about when we make or post or build something today, what are we trying to preserve? What kind of eternity do we hope for? We also saw that eternity isn't static. Egyptian imagery has lived many afterlives as colonial treasure, museum artifact, fashion icon, and even political symbols. Each era reshapes it, claiming a piece of that power. From the Louvre to Instagram, the impulse is the same. We're still using images to say, I was here, remember me. The Egyptians remind us that memory is not neutral, it's built. Eternity depends on who has access to materials, visibility, and narrative. Whether it's a pharaoh commissioning a pyramid or an artist reclaiming Nefertiti's image today, the act of making is an act of power. So who gets to be eternal now? Whose images, names, and stories survive? And whose are erased? Now, when we stand before Egyptian art, we're not just looking at the past. We're looking at the human desire to matter beyond time. These tombs, statues, and scrolls whisper across millennia. To make something beautiful is to refuse the refusal to vanish. And maybe that's what art history really teaches us. Not just how people once imagined eternity, but how we're still trying to build it. I want you to think about these questions over the next few seconds, minutes, hours, weeks, however long you want to take. How do materials shape our sense of permanence? Can art make something eternal without physical durability? And in what ways are we still building tombs for ourselves and for others? Thank you.